She asked for nothing. Until a Navy general walked in and called her legend. Blood smells like copper and old pennies. But hospital politics smell like stale ambition and someone else's cologne. I'd learned to tell the difference in the same year. I learned to tell the difference between incoming and outgoing fire. And both lessons left marks I'd rather not look at directly. My name is Sarah Calloway. I worked nights at Mercy General as a float nurse. The invisible kind. The kind that gets assigned wherever the staffing holes are. The kind no one bothers to learn the last name of. They called me the limping lady on the 3rd floor. They thought that was all I was. Then a Navy admiral walked through the front doors and asked for legend, and the whole building went quiet in a way I hadn't heard since Helmand Province, 2011. Let me tell you how we got there. The ER smelled the way it always smelled at 6 a.m. Industrial bleach searing the back of the throat, used motor oil passing itself off as coffee. And underneath all of it, the sweet decay of diabetic ketoacidosis drifting out from Bay 4. I'd been on since 11 the night before. I'd emptied 2 bedpans, retagged 4 medication carts, and restocked the supply alcove on the East Wing 3 times, because Dr. Marcus Hale kept sending patients there who didn't belong there. And someone had to keep the chaos from eating itself. No one thanked me. No one noticed. That was the point. I'd taken the float position 8 months ago because float nurses don't belong anywhere. You move. You stay invisible. You do not accumulate a reputation that requires you to be anything other than a warm body filling a gap. To the civilian staff at Mercy General, the ER at 6 in the morning was a controlled crisis. To me, it was a waiting room. I'd seen what real crisis looked like, and it did not look like Dr. Hale snapping at residents about charting protocols. I had a way of noting exits when I entered a room. I couldn't stop doing it. It was a habit from a life I'd technically left behind. Like the way I still cataloged the civilians before the medical staff when I walked into a crowded space. Or the way I automatically identified which monitors were misreading before anyone else noticed the discrepancy. Nobody thought anything of it. Float nurses are furniture. Furniture does not require explanation. My left knee ached in the cold snap that had rolled in overnight. There was still a piece of shrapnel in it, about the size of a thumbnail. The surgeons in Germany had gotten everything dangerous. But that last fragment was sitting against scar tissue in a way that removing it would cost more than leaving it. I'd been told. I'd agreed. Some things you carry because the alternative is worse. I'd limped since 2013. And I'd never once explained it to anyone at Mercy General, because no one had ever asked. Dr. Marcus Hale arrived at 6:17 a.m. and owned the trauma bay immediately. He was tall, impeccably groomed even 12 hours into a rotation, and he smelled like cedar and arrogance. A specific combination I'd cataloged within 30 seconds of meeting him 8 months ago. He had the kind of institutional authority that came from being the most credentialed person in every room he'd ever stood in. And he deployed it the way some people deploy a weapon. Casually, constantly, and with a cheerfulness that made it harder to call it what it was. I was restocking the IV supplies in Bay 3 when he swept in with 2 residents trailing behind him like ducklings. "Calloway," he said. His voice carried across the entire department the way it always did, not loud exactly, but aimed. Like he wanted every person within earshot to be a witness. "Those ONEG units you flagged last night for the Rodriguez case." I set down the saline bag I was holding. The expiration date was within 12 hours. Protocol requires flagging anything under 24. Protocol. He said the word the way you'd say someone's joke had landed badly. "We lost 40 minutes finding replacements because you decided to play inventory clerk." The blood was expiring. I followed protocol. The blood was fine. You panicked. Those are two very different things, and I need you to understand the difference before you cost this department something that can't be replaced." He was already moving, already past me, his coat brushing the edge of the cart. "You are a glorified supply runner, Calloway. If we get a real trauma tonight, stay out of the way." I looked at the monitor in Bay 3. The resident closest to me, Chen, second year, still looked like he needed someone to pack his lunches, made a very deliberate study of his shoes. The charge nurse, Patterson, was suddenly deeply interested in something at the station. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. I went back to the saline bags. I sorted them by expiration date. I did not watch him walk away. The break room at 6:45 a.m. smelled like burnt coffee and someone's microwaved fish. I stood at the counter with a cup I wasn't really drinking and looked at the crack in the linoleum near the far wall, which I'd been meaning to report for 6 months and hadn't. Because reporting things required existing officially in a space, and I'd gotten very good at not doing that. I was so tired. Not the 12-hour shift kind of tired, the other kind. The kind that doesn't live in the muscles. It lives in the specific space behind the sternum where you've spent years filing things you no longer have the address for. I'd come to Mercy General because it was 3 states from anything that knew my name. Not my civilian name, the other one. The one I hadn't been called in 6 years. I'd requested float rotation specifically because float nurses don't accumulate expectations. You show up. You do the work. You go home to the apartment with the blackout curtains and the 3 locks on the door, and you don't dream about Helmand, or about the year you spent as a combat search and rescue corpsman attached to SEAL Team 8, or about the 11 men who came home with pulses they would not otherwise have had. You do not think about that. You especially do not think about the ones who didn't come home. I took a sip of the coffee. It tasted like motor oil and regret. I had a way with veins that no civilian nurse fully understood. I could find a viable line in the dark, in a moving vehicle, on a patient with collapsed vasculature in under 8 seconds. I'd done it under fire. I'd done it in the back of a helicopter with 4 men shouting conflicting orders at me and the rotor wash making it impossible to hear anything. I did it every shift at Mercy General, and nobody noticed, because you don't notice the float nurse. You notice the attending. You notice the chief of staff. You do not notice the woman with the limp who keeps the supply cart organized and never argues back. That morning, I'd watched Dr. Hale miss a deteriorating sepsis presentation in Bay 2 that I'd clocked from 15 feet away. I'd said nothing. I'd gone back to my cart. I was so tired. The fluorescent light above the break room sink buzzed with a low abrasive frequency that burrowed behind the eyes around hour 7 of any shift. I stared at it and didn't think about 2011. I was very good at not thinking about 2011. By 9 a.m., I'd been reassigned to the 4th floor to cover a gap in the orthopedic unit, which was fine with me because Dr. Hale did not operate on the 4th floor. And the orthopedic nurses left me alone to do my work without commentary. I spent 2 hours taking vitals, updating charts, and talking to a retired Marine gunnery sergeant named Earl Briggs, who was in room 412 following a hip replacement and was unambiguously the sharpest person I'd encountered in 8 months at Mercy General. He was 71, and he had the kind of eyes that had done their looking. He watched me work in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. Not threatening, not unkind, just assessing in a way that most people in this building were not capable of. He'd been waiting 3 hours for his pain medication to be adjusted, which his chart flagged as a known issue, which had been escalated and dropped twice, which was the kind of institutional failure that made my back teeth ache. "You're not from here," he said. Not a question. "I'm from a lot of places." I adjusted his IV drip. Your medication adjustment is on my list. I've escalated it again. This time directly to pharmacy. He watched me do it. The economy of motion, the specific sequence. You move funny for a nurse, he said. I limp, I said. Old injury. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said carefully. That's not what I mean. I didn't answer that. I finished the adjustment. I wished him a good morning and I left. On the way back to the nursing station, I passed Dr. Hale in the corridor, which was either coincidence or bad luck. And before I'd fully processed either, he was already speaking. Calloway, why are you on 4? Reassigned to cover orthopedic, I said. Staffing gap. The gap was supposed to be covered by Nguyen. Nguyen called out. I was available. He looked at me with the specific expression of a person who finds an obstacle annoying rather than significant. I need the East Wing supply cart restocked before 10. If you're not going to be useful up here, go to be useful down there. The resident behind him, Zhao, 3rd year, looked at a point on the wall just to the left of my ear. The supply cart was restocked at 7 a.m., I said. I'll check it again. No, I need it done now. By you personally. He was already moving. Float nurses float, Calloway. Try to remember that. He turned the corner. I stood in the corridor outside room 412 and looked at my hands. They were still. They were always still. I thought about the last thing my commanding officer had ever said to me, which was that the best operators he'd ever seen were the ones who could make the decision and live inside it without flinching. I thought about my IV cart on the East Wing. I swallowed. It tasted like ash. I turned and walked toward the elevator. Something was coming. I didn't know what it was yet, but I'd been in enough situations where the air changed before anything visible changed to know that this morning was not going to end the way it had started. Something was already in motion, even if no one in this building could feel it yet. I felt it the way I always felt things first, through the soles of my feet, through the low-frequency pressure behind the sternum. I pressed the elevator button, and I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. I was in the East Wing supply alcove at 9:47 a.m. when the building moved. Not violently. Not like an earthquake. Like something very heavy had just landed nearby. A low, sustained pressure that came up through the concrete floor and registered first in the soles of my feet, then in the metal shelving I was touching, then in the fillings in my back teeth. I went still. I set down the IV kit I was holding. It wasn't an earthquake. I knew what it was. I hadn't heard it in 6 years, and I would have recognized it in my sleep. That was the ground signature of an MH-60M Blackhawk operating at low altitude over an urban area. And based on the acoustic profile, heavy, rhythmic, not the high, frantic whine of a civilian medevac, it was not alone. I counted. 2. No, 3 distinct rotor signatures, staggered. 1 primary, 2 flanking. I pressed my hands flat against the shelving, and I looked at the wall that faced the parking lot. Down the corridor, someone yelled. Patterson, the charge nurse. What is that? Those are military helicopters. Her voice had the particular pitch of civilian shock. Call down to the ER. Call security. I shoved my hands into the pockets of my scrubs. The vibration intensified. They were landing. In the parking lot, not the helipad. The helipad didn't have the weight rating for an MH-60M at full operational load, and whoever was flying knew that. Not your problem. I said it inside my skull, clear and firm. The way you say something you need to believe. This is not your problem. You are a float nurse. You restock supply carts. You left that life 6 years ago, and you packed it away in a place you do not go, and you are not going back today. The building shuddered. The lights flickered once. I heard the sound of people running in the main corridor. I did not move. Downstairs, the ER had gone from its 9 a.m. controlled chaos to something louder and worse. And even through 2 floors and a set of fire doors, I could hear Dr. Hale's voice. Elevated now. Stripped of its casual authority. Sharp with the kind of fear that only appears when someone competent realizes the situation is beyond what they know how to handle. I recognized that specific octave. I'd heard it in other places, in other corridors, from other men who were very good at what they did until they encountered something they weren't trained for. 3 Navy personnel had come in with a 4th on a portable stretcher, and from what was reaching me through the building, a shouted assessment, the specific terminology, the call for equipment that Mercy General's trauma bay had never been asked to produce. The 4th man was in penetrating chest trauma with a tension pneumothorax developing, and whoever was treating him downstairs did not have the training to perform a needle decompression under combat protocol conditions. I knew exactly what that sounded like. I pressed my back against the supply alcove shelf. My hands, inside my pockets, were beginning to shake. Not yet. Patterson found me at 9:53 a.m. She was breathless, and her lanyard was twisted, and she pointed at me with the particular energy of someone who has found a solution to a problem they don't fully understand. Calloway. She was already gesturing down the corridor. Dr. Hale says all non-essential staff to the East Wing and the 3rd floor. He doesn't want... The situation downstairs requires... I heard? He specifically said non-essential staff. He specifically said, I heard, Patterson. I looked at her. I'll go to the East Wing. She nodded. She was already turning, already moving, already dealing with the 14 other things that needed her. She didn't look back. I walked toward the East Wing fire door. I stopped. I stood in the corridor outside the elevator, and I listened. Below me, 2 floors down, through concrete and steel and a fire door, I could hear the monitors. The specific rhythm. The chime pattern that every nurse learns in the first week of any clinical training. The one that means deterioration. The one that means the margin is closing. The one that means the next 3 minutes are the only 3 minutes that matter. I heard the civilian staff. I heard Dr. Hale's voice, high and sharp and wrong, ordering a procedure that was not the right procedure for what I was hearing. I heard Earl Briggs in room 412 behind me, who had looked at my hands and said, "That's not what I mean." With the careful recognition of someone who had seen that kind of stillness before and knew what it came from. I looked at the elevator buttons. My hands, when I pulled them from my pockets, were shaking. I looked at them, both of them, shaking in a way they had not shaken in 6 years, in a way they'd shaken the first time my corpsman instructor had looked at me and said, "When they shake, it means you understand the stakes. The ones who never shake are the ones you don't trust." I pressed the button for the first floor. I heard the doors before I saw them. The east entrance to the ER, the double automatic doors that backed up to the ambulance bay, had been breached. Not broken, driven. 2 of the 4 doors were folded back on their frames in a way that automatic doors don't go, and through the gap I could see the tactical entry formation that had produced it. 4 Navy personnel in operational gear moving through the space in a pattern that Mercy General's security team was currently standing 6 feet back from, completely still, having made the correct calculation about whether they wanted to involve themselves. They were not there for the ER. They were looking for someone. The lead figure, tall, silver at the temples, insignia I recognized without being able to look at directly, had stopped 3 feet inside the doorway and was scanning the room with the specific economy of a person who had been trained to find things quickly in environments that did not want to be found in. Dr. Hale appeared from the trauma bay, white-faced, already asserting. This is a hospital. You cannot. This is a medical facility. You have a patient who requires. Your team, the lead figure said, in a voice that was not loud and did not require to be, cannot treat what he has. Step back. I am the chief of trauma at this. Step back, doctor. Dr. Hale stepped back. It happened before he'd visibly decided to do it. It was the tone. I knew that tone. I'd been given that tone in a lot of places where the alternative to compliance was a different kind of conversation entirely. I was standing in the doorway to the main corridor. I had not gone to the trauma bay. I had not announced myself. I was watching. The lead figure scanned the room again. His eyes moved through the staff, nurses, residents, a paramedic crew still processing what was happening around them, and stopped, briefly, on each face. He spoke. Legend. One word. Not a question. A statement. Like a key being placed into a lock. Not to turn, just to confirm the lock is there. The word landed in the middle of the room and nobody moved. The nurses looked at each other. The residents turned their heads, searching for someone who might know what it meant. The paramedic crew exchanged a look. Patterson began a sentence and didn't finish it. I was standing in the doorway. I was the only person in the room who did not look around. I looked at my hands, both of them. The shaking had stopped. I didn't know when it had stopped. I looked at the floor and at the IV bag I was holding that I didn't remember picking up, and at the specific crack in the linoleum near the trauma bay threshold that I'd been meaning to report for 8 months. And then I looked up. He was already looking at me. Not at the other nurses, not at the door. At me. At the woman standing in the doorway, who was not turning her head to find the source of the name because she already knew exactly what it meant. Had known what it meant for 10 years, would know what it meant when she was 90 years old and still carrying a piece of shrapnel in her left knee. I felt something shift inside my chest. Not pain. More like a door that had been held shut for 6 years releasing its pressure. Not opening, just releasing, like it was waiting to see what I'd do. I pushed off the door frame. I walked. Not fast, not slow. Steady. The way you walk when you've made a decision and you're done fighting it. Something changed in my posture as I crossed the ER floor. And I know this because I saw Dr. Hale, standing 6 feet to my left, watch it happen. I was not taller. I was not harder. I was aligned. Like something that had been held at a wrong angle for 6 years had been permitted to correct itself. I reached the trauma bay threshold and I looked at the patient. 30 seconds of assessment. Male, late 20s, Navy operational gear, tactical vest partially removed, penetrating wound below the right clavicle. With the specific presentation that meant what I'd heard from 2 floors up. Tension pneumothorax building, tracheal deviation beginning. The margin between alive and not closing at a rate the civilian monitors were only partially capturing because they were not set up to capture it. Dr. Hale was behind me. Calloway, what do you think you are? Move, I said. My voice did not rise in volume. It changed in texture, became something sharper and colder, something that did not live in the register of requests. It was not the voice I'd been using for 8 months. It was a voice that had made decisions in conditions where the alternative to correct decisions was a body count, and it had not forgotten how to function. Dr. Hale moved. I didn't see it happen. I heard it. I was already at the cart. 14-gauge angio catheter, I said, to no one and everyone. 3.5 inch. And someone get me a second pair of gloves. Mine are large. I'm not legend anymore. That name belongs to a person who spent 4 years in combat theaters and came home through Germany with shrapnel in her knee and filed her discharge papers in a VA office in Virginia on a Tuesday in March. 8 months after the operation that she would not discuss with anyone who had not been there. I'm Sarah Calloway. I restock supply carts and I keep my head down. But I know how to do this. The resident, Zhao, who had looked at the wall during the corridor incident, appeared at my left shoulder with the angio catheter before I'd finished saying it. I glanced at her once. She was pale and focused, and her hands were shaking. Mine were not. I found the landmark. Second intercostal space, right side of the chest, mid-clavicular line. The same landmark I'd found in the back of a helicopter over a dust and rock valley outside Sangin in 2011 on a patient whose name I would never forget. With rotor wash deafening everything and the aircraft banking hard enough that I'd had to brace with both knees. I'd found it then in 11 seconds. I found it now in 7. The needle went in. The rush of trapped air, that specific sound, that confirmation, and the patient's oxygen saturation began its correction on the monitor before I'd finished taping the catheter down. Second intercostal, right mid-clavicular, I said, for the record, for Zhao, for whoever was going to write this up later. We need a chest tube within the next 20 minutes for full decompression. He also has early signs of hemorrhagic compromise in the subclavian. That vest took the worst of it, but there's residual vascular involvement. He needs imaging, and he needs a thoracic surgeon who has done this in a non-standard environment. I stepped back. I looked at the patient's color. Better. Not good. Better. The lead figure, the Admiral, because I'd let myself confirm it now, because I'd seen the insignia and it said exactly what I'd thought it said, was standing at the foot of the bed. He had not spoken since the trauma bay. He was watching me the way Earl Briggs had watched me that morning from room 412. The way people watch something when they've already made their identification and are simply confirming it. She moved the way people move, he said very quietly, to the person beside him, when the stakes are real. I was already checking the patient's radial pulse. 53 words per minute, stronger than it had been 90 seconds ago. He needs to go to imaging, I said. Can your team transport? Yes, the Admiral said. Then let's move. I was outside the trauma bay at 10:22 a.m. I was leaning against the wall, the same wall I'd pressed myself against 20 minutes ago, and I was looking at the crack in the linoleum floor. My hands were in my pockets. They were still. The Admiral came through the trauma bay door and stopped 3 feet from me. He was Rear Admiral James Wyatt. I knew this because I had served 1 operational rotation under his direct command, in a theater he'd been brought in to stabilize when the previous command structure had fractured. And because his voice, that specific low authoritative register, not loud, not effortful, was one I would have recognized anywhere. He had not aged the way some officers aged. He had simply become more compressed, like weight had been added to something already dense. Calloway, he said. Sarah Calloway. Sir, I've been looking for you for 4 months. There was nothing performative in the way he said it, just the fact. The recommendation for the Medal of Naval Medicine came through last year. We needed your verification. I didn't say anything. The record was going to be read regardless, he said, into the official archive. But I wanted to do it in person. He looked at me for a moment. I think you've earned that. Dr. Hale was standing 15 feet away, near the nursing station, in the specific posture of a person who has just had the ground shifted under them and has not yet found new footing. He was watching. He had not said anything since the trauma bay. Rear Admiral Wyatt turned. The 3 other Navy personnel, who had arranged themselves in a loose perimeter around the ER, came to attention. Wyatt spoke loudly enough for the room. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Calloway. Call sign Legend, SEAL Team 8 Medical Support, 2008 through 2013. Helmand Province, Kandahar, Sangin. 11 confirmed field saves under direct hostile fire, including 3 during the Sangin extraction in 2011 that were subsequently classified and have since been partially declassified for the purposes of this commendation. Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, 2010. Navy Cross, 2012, for action above and beyond the call of duty during combat search and rescue operations in which she sustained injuries, including the penetrating wound to the left knee she is currently still carrying fragments from, that would have evacuated most personnel permanently. She declined medical discharge. She completed the rotation. He paused. He looked at me. She completed the rotation. The room was silent the way rooms are only silent when everyone in them has stopped breathing at the same time. Dr. Hale was standing near the nursing station. I looked at him once, briefly, and I wish I could tell you I felt something clean and specific, like triumph or vindication. But what I actually saw was a man discovering that the world was considerably larger than the radius of his authority, and the expression it produced on his face. The way the competence remained while the arrogance failed underneath it. The way a man looks when he realizes he has been wrong in a category of wrongness he did not know existed, was just very human and very sad, and not mine to carry. He had no expression that covered what he had just learned. Rear Admiral Wyatt looked at me. He brought his right hand to his temple. Behind him, in a single motion, the 3 Navy personnel did the same. The sound of their gears shifting during the movement, fabric and hardware, the specific weight of full tactical dress, was the only sound in the room. I looked at my hands. I brought my right hand up. I held it there. Zhao was standing near the trauma bay door. She had her hands over her mouth. Patterson, at the nursing station, was blinking very fast at a point on the ceiling. Earl Briggs, who someone had evidently brought down from room 412 in a wheelchair while I wasn't paying attention, was sitting near the east wall with the expression of a man who has just seen something he already knew was true, confirmed in front of witnesses. He nodded at me once. I nodded back. The morning passed, the way mornings pass after something large has moved through them. Slowly, in pieces. Everyone finding their footing in a world that had been rearranged by about 15 degrees. The patient, Petty Officer First Class Daniel Torres, whose name I now knew, was transferred to imaging and then to the thoracic suite, where the resident on call, following my assessment notes, performed the chest tube under the supervision of the thoracic attending in 48 minutes. I was told later that he was stable by noon. I was told that his team had flown him from a training facility 60 miles away, when the civilian trauma team there had been unable to assess the full scope of the injury. I was told a lot of things in the hour after the salute that I mostly processed, while restocking the supply cart on the east wing. Because the supply cart needed restocking, and someone had to do it, and I was available. Dr. Hale had a conversation with the hospital's chief medical officer at 11 a.m. I was not present for this conversation. I heard about it the way you hear about most hospital conversations, secondhand, in pieces, while doing something else. I did not need to attend it to know what was said or what the result would be. These things find their own level. I finished the supply cart at 11:40 a.m. I went to the break room and poured a cup of the terrible coffee and stood at the counter and looked at the crack in the linoleum. The fluorescent light above the sink hummed its low abrasive frequency. I drank the coffee. It tasted like motor oil. It was the exact same terrible coffee it had been at 6:45 that morning. The morning had changed a great deal in 5 hours, and the coffee had not changed at all, which was either a comfort or a reminder. I wasn't sure which. Rear Admiral Wyatt appeared in the doorway. He did not enter. He looked at me for a moment with the expression of a man who has something to say and has decided to leave it unforced. "The commendation record goes into the archive on Thursday," he said. "I know." "You could come back," he said. "There are positions. Medical advisory, training, non-operational. You would not be required to deploy." I looked at the coffee. "I have a shift tonight," I said. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. He was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he said finally. "I suspected that." He left. I finished the coffee. I set the cup in the sink. I went back to the nursing station and pulled Earl Briggs' chart and confirmed that his pain medication adjustment had finally come through from pharmacy. It had at 10:55 a.m., 3 hours later than it should have been, but there. And I made a note in the chart and flagged it for the afternoon shift nurse. Then I opened the top drawer of the supply cart and neatly arranged the masks inside.